career.
Yeah, so we're live, guys. Thank you everyone for joining tonight for our Health and Human Services Committee meeting, Monday, April 5th, 2021. We are broadcasting live on HPA-TV, channel 96 on Comcast and on Frontier, and also will be rebroadcasted on all of HPA-TV social media platforms. So today we're joined by voting member Councilwoman Rossetti, voting member Councilman Gale, Councilwoman Shirley Surgeon, Corporation Counsel Damara Osborne, Director I. Charles Matthews, and Director Liani Arroyo. So thank you everyone for joining tonight. So we'll start off the meeting by going over the second item on here, which is the Mayor Bronin with the accompanying annual report submitted on behalf of the Advisory Commission on Food Policy for the City of Hartford. This annual report is mandated by city ordinance and recounts the activities of the commission for 2020. Is there anyone here speaking on behalf of the food policy? I know we've been reaching out for a couple months now and have been unable to have someone speak on this item. So that being said, since no one's here to present for this meeting, would someone like to make a motion to postpone this again? Yes, Councilman Gale?
Yeah, happy to, Mr. Chair. Just a question before I make the motion. Have we reached out to the commission itself?
Yes, we have.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate. Okay, well, so move to postpone this to the next regularly scheduled meeting of this committee.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion on the floor to postpone this item. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 So moved. Item has been postponed again to the next council meeting. All right, the next item we have is a resolution requesting that the mayor's office to provide more consistent administrative support dedicated to translation services for Hartford's Puerto Rican, Latin, and Hispanic communities. And anyone here to speak on this item? Oh, okay. I think Amy Chambers joined this meeting. Hello, Ms. Chambers. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. So we moved on to the resolution requesting that the mayor's office to provide more consistent administrative support dedicated to translation services for Hartford's Puerto Rican, Latin, and Hispanic communities. Anyone here to talk on this item? Okay. All right. Since no one's here to talk on this item again for the second month, I'll take a motion to postpone this item.
So move.
Second.
Second. Okay. Any discussion? Seeing none, vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Okay. Thank you. And I just want to just point this out. This is the second month. If anyone can assist in getting folks to communicate on any of these items, I'm asking for anyone's help. We have been unable to secure anyone for these items. So, all right. So we'll move on to resolution requested the Mayor Hartford, the Hartford Health Department, local government officials, state legislatures, and the Capital Region Council of Governments take the lead and collectively dig out the root causes of homelessness and work systematically to put in place a process for all 169 cities and towns to actively contribute and participate in an issue that affects us all. So this was introduced by Councilwoman Rossetti, and I know we had some follow-up items.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so we reached out to the CROG, I think it's called, and we're unable to secure anyone for this. But I don't know, Councilwoman Rossetti, if you want to speak more to this or.
So you were able to, no one, they refused, or you weren't able to?
We weren't able to connect with someone. It's been a week, and as far as I know, we sent the link out earlier today, this afternoon, and with the thoughts that maybe they would be able to attend.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, I think a little, maybe some conversation with them beforehand. Let me contact somebody there.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Rossetti.
You're welcome.
All right, since no one's here to speak on this item, I'll take a motion to postpone this item as well.
So move.
Second.
Second, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, so move. We postpone this item again. It's like a pattern here today. All right, so we'll move on to the ordinance amending Chapter 27, itinerant vendors, street vendors, and food trucks of the Hartford Municipal Code. Is there anyone here to speak on this item?
Yes.
All right, great. The floor is yours, Ms. Chambers.
Thank you. Thank you, council members, for having me here tonight. And Charles Matthews is here as well. I am here to speak on the modification to Chapter 27. This is something that the mayor's office has been in communication with both Development Services and Health and Human Services about over the course of the last year thereabouts, certainly sometime before that, but really kind of mobilizing over the course of the last year. The goal of the rewrite of the chapter is in some ways to simplify some of the processes that we have on an operational basis with regard to our permitting of the food trucks in particular, but of just vendors overall. In addition, the goal is to clarify some of the role around ability to enforce. It, I think, is no secret that we've had some challenges over the course of time with being able to enforce some of the provisions or specific issues that we've had with some food truck vendors. In addition, the goal here is to be able to provide some additional clarity with regard to the requirements or expectations that the city, that the administration has with regard to the operations of those vendors themselves. The current ordinance does not include many of the specifications that are included now in the proposal. Going into, I guess, a little bit more detail, the modifications to the ordinance include a limitation on the operation from a time standpoint, also include limitations on specifically the placement of vehicles or carts, in particular obstructing the sidewalk, provide additional provisions with regard to requirements for waste. They also provide some additional provisions with requirements around the location of trucks themselves and how and where they vend. One of the biggest modifications that we're making here is that as it stands, there are fees associated with food truck vendors locating in the downtown. We are proposing to do away with those fees that they now have to pay in order to park and operate in downtown, and to provide a bit more guidance around where vendors can operate in general citywide, in addition to within the downtown footprint. We are adding a license requirement within Development Services, which right now, for comparison's sake, the only food trucks that Development Services keeps track of are those that are locating in downtown. whereas we're proposing to be able to keep track of all of the food trucks and to just have a little bit more coordination between Development Services, Health and Human Services, and the Parking Authority with regard to ongoing enforcement activities. I think I can stop there for now, and I'm sure you have questions, so I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have, any specific questions that you have, or if you'd like me to kind of go into more detail with regard to what's written, I can do that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Chambers. I do want to recognize Council President Mally Rosado, who has joined us today. So I'll open the floor to my colleagues. If there's any questions, do you guys have any questions? Councilman Gale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Amy. You mentioned a time requirement. Can you be specific as to, is there a specific hour that's been set citywide after which vending from a food truck will not be allowed?
Yes, Councilman, that hour is 9 p.m. Presently, there is an executive order in place which limits the operation of food trucks to 9 p.m. The intent is to continue that limitation with that 9 p.m. Limit in mind. And the intent is also to have food trucks off the street between the hours of 9 p.m. Off the street between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., not operating between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m.
So we were also provided with a map in conjunction with the ordinance. And do I assume that there's interplay between the two, and that the ordinance then refers to the map, and the places that are demarcated on the map are those places where food trucks will be allowed to vend?
That is correct.
So, you know, my own, just to, you know, check my own personal opinion into this, I see that we have areas there that are like in the North Meadows and the South Meadows, which certainly makes a lot of sense to me. You know, to allow vending. I don't know if it's Ledyard Street or Locust Street, but I can see, you know, yeah, both. You got both of them down in the South Meadows, where, you know, nobody lives. And I also see we have areas up in the North Meadows, you know, likewise, where, you know, there are no residents to be bothered. And, you know, I would kind of like Hartford to be not a 24-hour city, but, you know, 23-and-a-half-hour city. Mm-hmm. I don't think we should be rolling up the carpets at 9 o'clock. And I recognize that food trucks can actually provide, you know, I think they provide another aspect of vitality to your city. And in particular, when the bars get out, they can provide a place where somebody can get something to eat before going home, and, you know, maybe help eliminate some drunk drivers on the road even. So I'm just wondering to what extent we might consider, or you have considered, being willing to expand hours in particular, you know, so that we would have a bifurcated, I mean, I know we've had problems in some neighborhoods, and I'm sure, you know, if I lived around the corner from a place where a food truck was in operation at 1 in the morning, I might be pretty upset. I know we've heard from neighbors who are pretty upset, but having a food truck down on Ledyard Street at 1 in the morning, or you know, for, you know, after hours wouldn't offend. It doesn't seem like it would offend anybody. I wonder whether there's been any thinking along those lines at Development Services.
I can start, and then I don't know if there's anything, Charles, you'd like to add. I think that certainly you understand that the limitation on the hours is certainly in response to some of the concerns that have been voiced with regard to operations of food trucks. And I would say in some of the locations where we've had concerns, they're not necessarily residential in nature, but commercial in nature. I think that the way that we have been thinking about the response to that is to, as you see, curtail those operations with those hours. And I certainly understand the desire to have food available, you know, after hours, after you get out of a bar or what have you. One of the ways that we have been, I think, exploring how to address that is to consider developing space for food trucks to operate in food truck parks instead of along the street. By doing that, we have, I think, potentially better control of the space, in particular if it's a city-operated food truck park. Knowing, you know, the food truck vendors that are there and knowing that they're agreeing to probably, you know, some additional sort of contract agreement to be in that space and to be able to operate. I think that's the goal that we have set out with and the kind of endpoint that we're looking to operate under. So I think that's probably the kind of first line when I think of how we respond to the desire to make sure that there is still space for food trucks to operate and for people to be able to kind of have that bit of gathering, you know, after you get out of a bar or wherever else you are. I think it provides an element of control that the food trucks right now that are operating on the street, we just don't have. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add, Charles.
Well, you've said it all, but I think for the council person to note is the idea of a food truck park, it becomes a point of destination. So the degree that anyone, you, myself, council person, leaves a bar at 12 o'clock, I would have a point of destination. Our hope is to have a food truck park both in the north end and the south end. So depending on which bar you leave, you can go either south or go north. The other thing is, although we all would like the city of Hartford to be a 24/7 or a 23.5-hour city, really not. Most folks that we have heard from as they relate stories about the food trucks would like to have us limit the hours for a whole lot of different reasons. So we're trying to accommodate the food truck operators and accommodate those folks who will want a little bit more activity after 9 o'clock by figuring out if we can set up food truck parks as a point of destination. And that may solve some of your problems, Councilman.
Well, thank you. I would welcome that, and I would sort of welcome that in conjunction with this, as opposed to maybe, you know, waiting with a dearth of activity in between times. And you mentioned North End and South End. You didn't mention the West End, and I know that we you know, historically there. I mean, it's kind of unfortunate. You know, going back in time. For many years, the Comet Cafe on Farmington Avenue was a late night destination place, and down across Union Station, you had the Connecticut Lunch, and you know everybody knew you could go to the Connecticut Lunch anytime you wanted to, and you could get eggs and bacon and home fries at 2 a.m. But we don't have those places anymore, and not having them, it seems like the next best thing is from an economic standpoint, because we don't have, you know, too many places that are willing to be open 24 hours a day anymore, having these the food truck availability. So I personally, as I said, I mean, I would like to see us not completely shut down the option for late night, clearly control it. And I'm interested when Ms. Chambers mentions that the concern has come from other business owners. It's interesting to me that, you know, what business owner on Ledyard Street at 1 o'clock in the morning would have a concern. I mean, maybe something would happen later on, but I mean, I understand, you know, if you're on Maple Avenue and you're a business that's competing, if you got, you know, one of these gas stations is competing with a food truck, maybe this is a problem, but getting them off of Maple Avenue and down the south end, the South Meadows, North Meadows might solve that problem. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, Councilman Gale. Ironically enough, I had a meeting at 4 o'clock today about someone who's interested in perhaps pursuing opening a food truck park in the West End. So I just thought, yeah, that actually did happen. So I just thought I would share that with you. And you know, I think just in response to the comment about you know, Locust Street and Ledyard Street, I think there's perhaps a bit of a balance to be struck between the timing of the operations and making sure that there's still, you know, eyes on the street and you know, just a kind of sense of place. And so as we think about, you know, having the food trucks in the North Meadows and the South Meadows, I think, you know, there's an element of that that's advisable as we continue to roll this out, that kind of lends itself to that question of us having maybe food truck parks that open later, because having a little bit of place and there may help to secure sites in a way that having a food truck, you know, or series of food trucks operating at 1 a.m. on Ledyard Street may not. So
I just want to interject and welcome voting member Majority Leader Clark and Councilman Sanchez to our meeting. I just want to acknowledge them. But we have another question from Councilwoman Surgeon.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Amy, thank you so very much and all the hard work you guys have been doing on this ordinance. It stemmed from several different communities, both in the South and the North, complaining regarding the food trucks late at night and the crowds that are drawn and the music that are played. And I do understand Councilman Gale wanting the city to, you know, feel active, but also where the trucks were being parked, you know, it's affecting a lot of the residential areas also. So I do commend you, and I do certainly support a food truck park. In the ordinance, there was a dedication of an area in Upper Albany, which was Woodland and Homestead. Speaking to the NRZ and neighborhood, they don't want any food truck, even a designated area in the Upper Albany neighborhood. So I was trying to find my ordinance to tell you what page it was located on. But there's somewhere in the ordinance where it designated the area where truck may be able to participate and have a food truck in that area. So I am asking, I'm strongly against any food trucks in Upper Albany. Again, the NRZ and the neighbors do not want any food trucks in Upper Albany. Lots of our restaurants are open late in our neighborhood. And so in response to Councilman Gale, yes, people coming out of the club can get food now that things are opening up. Most of our restaurants in our neighborhoods are takeout. So they can do takeout, you know, on the way home. So is there any way, Amy, to take out that location in Upper Albany?
I was just pulling up the map. So there's an area along Homestead that is
right
delineated. Yeah, is that the area that you're talking about?
Yes. Apparently, there is a gas station across from that area. And there is also a liquor store right there also. And there have been food trucks in the past that have been located there. And it has caused many concern late at night with the congregating of people in that area.
Noted.
All right. Madam President Rosado.
Thank you for the chair. And hold on a second. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Good evening, everyone. I just want to express my sentiments as Councilman Gale did. These food truck vendors, they pay their taxes, they pay their licenses. I have had a lot of concerns on council from members, from residents, right? Where they hear these food trucks, some of them until 4 o'clock in the morning. No one wants to hear this in their backyard, but as a city, we also have to be accommodating. And I'd like to see a food district, a food park, whatever it is that you guys want to call it, but we need something like that. I know that I enjoy going to New Haven. They have a food truck district by, what is it, a river there by
Yeah,
the
by the water. Yes.
by the water, and everyone enjoys it. And let me tell you something. I know that we have a lot of small business restaurants, but sometimes for families, you know, food trucks is where they go. They can afford it, you know. So I've had a lot of complaints from residents, and I've also have sat down with food truck vendors, and I have heard what they're going through, especially through this pandemic. And I know, Amy, that you said that, you know, it's not the city of Hartford, it's an executive order. That order will be lifted soon. More and more people are getting vaccinated. So I'd like to see development services come up with a plan. You know, not stating that we have an order, but a plan in place as to a timeline of when can we create a district or a park or what have you for these vendors. Thank you.
Did we have any other questions? I thought I saw a hand up. Councilman Sanchez?
So I'm not sure if this.
Councilman Sanchez? Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm getting a serious feedback here. So my apologies, I had some technical difficulties on hearing anything or getting on anything. So I do have a question that I don't think we touched on. If a person purchases a lot, is that person able to put a food truck on it if that person owns the lot?
So if the lot is zoned to allow food trucks, then they are able to put a food truck on it. There is a provision in the zoning regulations presently, section 3.7.3, which is specifically with regard to food truck operation. And the zoning regulations are what governs private property. So that would be what they fall under. So as long as the property is zoned, they would be able to do so, yes. They would need to obtain a zoning permit.
Okay, and my second one is that I would like to propose a distance of 100 feet from any brick or mortar restaurant. As last week, I received some complaints.
So if I may, I think that that's a difficult task. Councilman, with all due respect, we are a city that has restaurants kind of interspersed everywhere. And I think it becomes very difficult from an enforcement standpoint to say, like, you can be here, but not be there, when we've created a map that tries to address or to make recommendations about spaces along the road where it makes sense. And if we do that, we're going to create a really hodgepodge kind of effect as far as where food trucks can and cannot locate. I think to the council president's statements, our goal is to try to facilitate the operation of food trucks. It is to try to make it such that there's more clarity on the side of food truck owners, as well as owners of brick and mortar establishments, to understand what the rights and responsibilities are of those food truck operators. We have proposed in the ordinance change that the food truck operators should not be within a certain number of feet of an intersection or a hydrant or a driveway, which the ordinance doesn't specifically say now. We've also proposed in it that they can't be directly in front of the entrance to an establishment. We've done a lot of research, a lot of studies on other municipalities and their food truck requirements. And I would note, bringing up New Haven and the wharf, that location is really popular, and that's a location, you know, to your point, that isn't near any restaurants, and I think that was done intentionally. It's also a location that, you know, is kind of isolated, and so they've not isolated in terms of access, but isolated in terms of what else is happening there. And so I think they've done a good job of trying to do some marketing and some place making. But I think that on the other hand, you know, we've done a lot of background research about the impact of food trucks on brick and mortar establishments, and I realize that there's kind of a natural tension and feeling towards tension there, but data really shows that those two entities don't compete with one another, and I think that that's part of why it would be for just a bit more of a challenge from an operational standpoint to be able to have that kind of distance requirement from a restaurant.
Through you, Chair. So at this moment, with the ordinance that we have now, there is no distance required. And with the new ordinance, there's a 20 feet distance, correct?
There is a distance requirement from the entrance to an establishment, a distance, there's not a specific, as I recall, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, so you have to forgive me, but I don't believe there's a specific foot requirement. They are not permitted to locate immediately in front of an entrance to an establishment. There is a distance requirement in terms of actual feet from intersections, driveways, bus
Right.
stops, and
So-
hydrants.
So I'm focusing more because the complaint I received is that food truck was stationed immediately in front of a restaurant. These were two different calls. So that's what I'm concerned about. To accommodate the brick and mortar, and I understand food truck has the right to, you know, to have their own income, and they're also taxpayers. But there has to be a balance, and that's why I'm proposing 100 feet distance from the entrance of any restaurant establishment. It's the only request I'm asking. That's feasible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Sanchez. Majority Leader Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, question. If there has been some opposition already regarding where some of these food truck districts would be placed at, for example, Councilwoman Surgeon noted that the NRZ and other community members, business members of the Albany neighborhood did not want the food truck designation to be at the corner of Albany and Woodland. Has Development Services looked at other parcels if there was some opposition from community members and business members as to where the designated areas would be?
Amy, let me try that, Councilman. From a policy point of view, and certainly council members have to deal with the policy, we're trying to balance this thing out. Someone said earlier that the food truck operators, many of them live in the city, not all of them, many of them pay taxes in one way or the other, and probably 90% of them, 90% of the food truck operators are either black or brown, and they're trying their best to support their families and make a living. So we're trying to come up with an ordinance that will balance out all the interests. Now, our idea of having a food truck park will allow, we thought, many of the food truck operators to have a point of destination, one in the south end, one in the north end, and as the council member Gale pointed to, one in perhaps in the west end. If in fact communities are going to say they don't want a food truck park anywhere in their neighborhood, it becomes very difficult for us to come up with an ordinance that will balance out all the interests. I mean, you should know that going in that's the problem we'll run into, Councilman, if that begins to happen. I don't believe we are in fact looking at a food truck park in the north, one in the south. as you heard today, maybe one in the West End. That might be the fairest way to accommodate these men and women who are simply trying to earn the living and support their families, along with the brick and mortar folks who are trying to do the same. It's a tough nut we have to deal with here.
If I could just add one point of clarification, the area that Councilwoman Surgeon pointed to that's an area on that map that is proposed access in the street versus those parcels which would be off street. So I just want to make sure that there's just clarity around that. That map speaks to locations that trucks would operate in the street versus this question of food truck parks, which would be off street and therefore governed by the zoning regulations.
I'm sorry, Amy, I didn't understand that.
So the map that was on the screen previously that is attached to the ordinance is about
the street.
The street, correct. The question of the food truck parks obviously would be off street. Those food truck parks would be governed by the zoning regulations, whereas those food trucks locating in the street are not governed by zoning. So just in response to Councilmember Clark's comment, you'd mentioned, Councilmember Clark, the note that Councilwoman Surgeon made about that map and then mentioned parcels. And so since Charles was responding about the food truck parks, I just want to make sure that there's distinction between the two.
Thank you. All right, Councilwoman Surgeon.
Mr. Chair, I wasn't finished.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize, Majority Leader.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, TJ.
To that point, thank you for making that clarity. So has Development Services identified some areas within the city that they cannot right now disclose as to where these parks would be?
You want me to take that, Amy?
Sure.
We have not clearly identified a site in the South End, nor have we clearly identified a spot in the West End. However, we are considering the parcel between Magnolia Street and Urban Street as a possible combination site that might include some mixed use activities there, one being a food truck park. It's not firm. We're just looking up and down the avenues and seeing what makes sense. You follow? Okay. You understand the site I'm talking about, where they now have the basketball court?
Yeah, where the substation used to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. I wouldn't call that Upper Albany, but some may.
Upper Albany / Play Arsenal.
Yeah.
And I think you would get the same pushback. I will support the food truck park in some parts of North Meadows, which is really nice, and you can get people off of the street. One of the issues when you put a food truck park in a community like this is I understand people, mom and pop, business trying to support a family, but it's creating other issues like safety that comes along with a food truck park, especially in the concerns we're having in the community at this time. Putting it someplace where it's enforceable, in a neighborhood where it's enforceable, like either South or, the Meadows area, I think is a little bit better enforceable, more than putting it on Route 44, Albany Avenue. We have several clubs on Route 44 and Albany Avenue in that neighborhood. And at 1-2 o'clock, you can't, because of number one, there is no parking. And number two, at 1-2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday or a Saturday, the place is rammed and it becomes very difficult crossing the street. There's some really major issues as far as safety is concerned in that neighborhood right there. I do support a food truck park, but I would love to see it more in the Meadows area.
Councilman Gale?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to my concern about the hours, and thinking about our zoning code, what I'd like to propose, and this is sort of in conjunction, Mr. Chair, with keeping this ordinance in committee for another month. I'd like to ask Development Services to go back to the map that they've drawn and show us where are the industrial districts. Under our new zoning code, they might not be called industrial districts anymore, but whatever our functional equivalent is for industrial districts, because I would ultimately, I think, like to propose that we have a bifurcated time limit, that if you're a food truck operating in an industrial district, that your hours could be extended, but that if you're a food truck operating outside of the industrial districts, that you would be limited to the 9 p.m. And by the way, Mr. Chair, I do have the map up if everyone would like. I shared it for a brief moment, but I didn't ask your permission. So
Can we see that again, if you don't mind,
yeah,
John?
no, I'm happy to. Yeah, I think everybody, the
Thank
public
you.
should be looking at the map. It's
Yeah.
fairly limited, really. I mean, I think Development Services, to their credit, so here's the map, and the purple, or yeah, I guess you would call it purple. The bright purple areas are the areas that, at least at this point, and certainly Ms. Chambers or Mr. Matthews, correct me, but I believe those are the only places that they're proposing to allow food trucks to operate. And so you can see when you go up to the North Meadows, here's the North Meadows right here. This whole area, they're perfectly willing to allow food trucks there, and it makes a lot of sense. We've got a 24-hour gas station that's now opened up on
I
Jennings
think
Road.
it's a perfect place. Yep.
It's going to be, tourists are going to be stopping through. I mean, that might make a lot of sense. And I think all of this area is probably zoned industrial or whatever our current word. And so that's where I'm thinking we could allow for extended hours. And likewise, if you move down to the South Meadows, you've got pretty much, here's the South Meadows. Again, a lot of purple here. And, this is Locust Street. And then, over here, Maxim Road and Murphy Road and Brainerd Road, Airport Road. So, again, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you would like me to make that in a motion. I guess I'd like to move that we keep this in committee and ask Development Services to come back showing these food truck districts by at least two zones.
Sure.
Anything that's industrial zone versus anything that's not industrial zone.
John, can you go back up to...
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. So basically, Amy, up in Upper Albany, right here.
Well, here's Upper Albany for you.
So
in fact, I can expand it for you if you like. Let's make it a little bigger.
So, Amy, you're saying all of Woodland Street between Baltimore and... Yeah, you just lost me. Woodland Street and Baltimore. So it will be all of Woodland Street in that purple area. Is that correct, Amy?
That's Homestead. That's Homestead
I'm sorry,
Avenue.
Homestead. I'm sorry. Yes, Homestead.
That is what is proposed, yes. And Councilmember Gale, if I may, I certainly can come back with a map showing the zoning, but for discussion's sake, the industrial district, which we do have still as industrial, is basically the North Meadows and the South Meadows.
Thank you.
Councilman Gale, if you can, unless anybody has a question about the map, can you?
Yep. Go on.
Thank you. All right. So I before, with all due respect, Councilman Gale, if I'm not sure if all the questions were asked before we entertain the motion. Is any other questions? Okay, so I have Majority Leader Clark.
I just have one quick question regarding the timeliness of passing this ordinance. Is development services up against time regarding for us to pass this?
So I can say that the executive orders are set, at least at the moment, to expire the 20th of April. I'm not sure how if or how the governor's office plans on extending that. If at that time there isn't some decision made, the current limitation of the 9 p.m. On food trucks, I believe, would go away. So I think that's just something to be mindful of. But I think other than that, Charles, please feel free to chime in. But I think that aside, I don't think that there's another limitation that exists.
That's true.
I would say the summer is coming along really fast. So that's the limitation.
It's nice outside today for sure.
Exactly. And my food truck, Amy, was at the corner of Edgewood Street and Albany Avenue on the sidewalk.
So I have some questions. So the first thing is there a distinction between food trucks, ice cream trucks, and hot dog carts?
So the ordinance as it's proposed does not make a distinction between them, but for the buffer around recreation centers and schools, there's a proposed buffer in the ordinance, which those types of carts would be able to get closer than a food truck would. Otherwise, they're considered the same across the rest of the ordinance.
Great. So I don't know if anyone knows, I owned a hot dog cart, and on Franklin Avenue, I had it for a year, and one of the biggest things, or one of the most profitable things, was being able to put the hot dog cart after the bar closed. It was called Alpine. I'm not sure if it's still there. I think it is still there, and that's where I made the most money. That's how I fed my children. That's how I made a living. It was considered, I would say, probably 75% of the money that I earned was on Friday and Saturday nights in front of Alpine. This ordinance after 9 p.m. would considerably affect this business to the detriment of the business itself. Coming from experience, I'm not saying from anyone, this is just my own personal experience. But with that being said, for the ice cream truck, now, you all know ice cream trucks drive around, they pull over.
Yep. Noisy.
Certain areas. How are we going to be able to enforce that? Because the likelihood is they're not going to be, it's a business that's not linked to, like, it's not a stationary business, it's a mobile business. So how would we be able to enforce that?
I think, Councilman, I think that's a great question that honestly, I don't have an answer to right now. I'd be happy to put some thought into it and circle back with you, but I don't want to give you anything off the cuff when I haven't thought it through.
No, I hear you, because, in terms of policy, you try to think of, fidelity in terms of policy, right? So the food truck vendors per se would be designated to an area, but then the ice cream trucks can be wherever they want. And so that's something that should be brought into consideration. So in terms of record keeping, I know the ordinance discusses record keeping. Can you give me clarity on the role of record keeping and how does that interplay between development service? Is it development service? Well, who's involved in record keeping, and the clarity around record keeping, how the interplay between the departments?
For sure. So I think that some of this conversation around modifying the ordinance actually arose from the question of record keeping. I started with the city now about 2 years ago, and I recall when we first visited this conversation about food trucks in general, there was, I guess, question or just seeking to understand why development services didn't have a comprehensive list of businesses operating that are mobile. We were only really keeping tabs on businesses that were registering for space in those downtown locations where they're paying for parking spaces. And so certainly a part of this modification is to be able to, one, make sure that we have a more comprehensive list of those businesses, to make sure that we are creating, development services is creating records on those businesses from a more sweeping standpoint than we had been. I know that Director Arroyo is on the call, and from a food service standpoint, obviously those food trucks are going through her department, and there are records on that end. But from an enforcement standpoint, in particular with regard to development services and our ability to enforce or to share information with the parking authority or with the police, we are currently limited because we don't have record of all of those entities. And so what's proposed would help us from a tracking standpoint to work with those other departments to make sure that information is shared, and it puts some more responsibility on development services from a business licensing standpoint, and provides more clarity that the Health and Human Services aspect of it is, around the food licensing standpoint. And then from an enforcement standpoint, tries to make clear that, whether it's the police department or the parking authority, especially, that there's ability to enforce around kind of all of the elements of this ordinance related to the business licensing, and that Health and Human Services would continue to enforce from the food standpoint. Right now, there are some things that seem to kind of fall between the cracks because of the limited nature of the record keeping.
So let me just chime in here. First of all, I want to pause, right? And I want to thank you, Ms. Chambers, and you, Director Matthews. Like, this is an incredibly daunting task, right? Like, this is no easy chore. And I just want to pause and say that there's a lot of balls in the air when it comes to this ordinance. So thank you guys for putting this together. I have another question. In terms of, I'm in the human service field, and so oftentimes community-based organizations do fundraisers, things of that nature at their property, where part of it is, selling food on their property in front of the faith-based organizations, in front of churches and those type of things. How would this ordinance affect them?
So the way that the ordinance is written, it actually doesn't impact any change on those entities.
Okay, thank you. And then, I'm sorry, I'm very inquisitive, so bear with me. So in terms of arriving at the purple designated areas on the map, who was consulted? How did you guys come to that? And is there a possibility to discuss with council or so that council folks can give some input as to certain areas? As we heard Councilwoman Surgeon's concern for the Woodland, Albany area. Is there an ability? Number one, how did you derive at that? And number two, is there ability for council members to be able to give input as well?
Okay, so let's see. The development of this map has been it's been an iterative process and has been going on for a little while. So there have been different points of discussion over the course of time that even predate I. Charles in his capacity now. We began with a task force, if you will, of city officials, members from Health and Human Services, from the mayor's office, from the parking authority. I believe Janice Kessel was involved in some of the conversation. This was last spring. We had some kind of preliminary conversations around how we would adjust where food trucks would locate. We tried to gather data from the parking authority, and I believe at a point in time there were members from PD, although I would say that was probably at the very beginning of this process. We have past data within development services with regard to which food trucks have been locating where in the downtown footprint. We had, I would say we had some limited conversation with NRC chairs quite some time ago. I wouldn't say that's something that has happened recently. We ultimately ended up kind of starting with a map that reflected where, so I'll back up. Last June, the Planning and Zoning Commission modified the zoning regulations. That was a public hearing. There was input during the course of the hearing and leading up to it. Modified the zoning regulations to permit food truck operation on lots. Prior to that, there was no provision for food truck operation at all in the zoning regulations, which technically meant that it was not permitted. We based the basis of the map that you see now off of the map that the zoning regulations from where they permit food trucks. So looking at those parcels, those private parcels where food truck operation would be allowed, we took a look at, okay, how do we I guess explore and create a little bit of synergy there between where food trucks can operate off the street and where they can operate on the street. From there, we look to, I guess, pare it down a bit, taking into account feedback that we received, from residents, feedback that we received from other members within the administration, et cetera. And really taking into account which of those parcels, which of those zones in particular were more likely to be in proximity to residential areas. And so kind of trying to move out of those zones that were in proximity to residential areas, we narrowed down the map further. And then we took it back again, in particular to the parking authority to get some feedback from them. So it's been a bit of a process. There's been a lot of back and forth, but the overarching goal is how do we create some synergy between what's happening off street and on street? How do we try to keep food truck operation in particular away from residential neighborhoods? Those I think have been the guiding principles.
So the second part of the question, which is there ability for council to be involved as part of the iterations, the iterative process?
I don't see why not. I'm sorry, I'm kind of new to this process. So,
so as you see, we got, the council members are, my colleagues are very involved and in tune with the community. So if there is opportunity,
if in fact you tend to table this, and it sounds like you table it in committee, there's an opportunity certainly to get feedback from individual council members that we can look at and see what makes sense in view of the mapping and where food trucks ought to be located. We've already heard some stuff here that might suggest that some of our early ideas may not be exactly on point. But certainly there's an opportunity to take a look at the map and offer additional suggestions.
Yes, thank you, Director. All right, so I do want to point out one thing. In terms of ice cream trucks, while we're on this subject, I'm not sure if people are aware, one of the things that really bothers me with the ice cream trucks, since we're going to revisit and look at this, is the song that they I'm not sure if people are aware of that song that they plays. It actually is a racist song and derives from a racist history. It is from a song that it actually has a racist title. And so when we're looking at this, and I'm not even going to repeat the name because it's so slanderous and so disgusting, but I think it's important as we, as we rechange the narratives around certain things, that even something as minor as a song, that we make an impact and change this. If we can under this ordinance, also include the inability to play that song that the ice cream trucks play. Just want to just throw it out there, maybe plant a seed. Folks in the community can do research on the song. Not sure if people are aware of it, but it's something that we if we have this opportunity when we're talking about regulations regarding food trucks, if we can also include that in the now enforcement would be a challenge, of course, but I think we have to make our presence felt and take the opportunity when it comes. So with that being said, I'll entertain a motion. I believe Councilman Gale, you had a motion to postpone.
I did, Mr. Chair. So I'll renew the motion I made earlier, which is to keep this matter, postpone this matter in committee for the moment. And I think it now serves at least two purposes and perhaps more, but to Mr. Matthews' point, it allows for more feedback from council members as to those particular locations that they have concerns with. And also, I would like to see an overlay of industrial zones on the proposed map, and the thinking being that we would allow extended hours in industrial zones versus the other zones. So that's the motion at this point.
And I'll second that.
Second. All right. Any discussion?
So I make a point that we amend the motion to give the council members a period of time to respond to us, because as was said by one council member, the summer will be on us, and if we don't do something soon, those food trucks will be all over the place. So
Agreed.
if you can give yourself a period of time to respond with any clarifications, any questions, any commentary, that may be helpful also to us.
Thank you for the suggestion, Mr. Director Matthews. Excuse me.
Happy to include that in the motion, that all comments should be with Development Services before the next meeting of this committee, which is essentially 1 month from today.
All right. So we have a motion. Councilwoman Rossetti, do you second that motion with the amendment? Okay.
I second that motion, the amendment.
Thank you. Any discussion? Yes, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just want to keep in mind to the members of the committee that our meeting scheduled for next month does fall within the departmental budget hearings for the upcoming mayor's recommended budget. So the committee, through you, Mr. Chair, may need to convene a special committee meeting in order to, God bless you, Councilwoman Rossetti, in order for this committee to pass this ordinance in a timely manner.
Duly noted. Duly noted. So just anticipate a special meeting, committee members, on top of all the other meetings. All right. So all in favor? Aye. Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. Okay, the motion passes. Postponed to the next meeting, which will likely be a special meeting. All right, so resolution number 6, item number 6, resolution requesting that the Court and Common Council calls on representatives from the Hartford Public Library and the Mayor's Office to provide an update on progress of this taxpayer-funded initiative, and that the city's Office of Community Engagement provide a biannual report to the Court of Common Council on its efforts to engage, inform, educate Hartford's refugee and immigrant families. Is there anyone here to speak on this resolution? All right, seeing none. If I could just urge my committee members, if you guys can help, we had 4 items that for 2 months, we have been unable to connect and get someone here after trying to reach out. If anyone
Through you,
can-
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
how exactly is, how exactly are you reaching out to them? What,
I mean, yes, so through email.
and just random person? I mean,
No, well, like, so we're reaching out through the people that are in charge of, well, like the food policy
and
chair.
so no response?
No response, ma'am.
All right, so let's talk offline.
Yeah, if we could talk offline, that'd be very helpful. I appreciate it. Whatever help I can get. All right, with that being said, any other business? All right, seeing none, thank you all for joining today's meeting. I appreciate it. And we'll see you probably in a month with a special meeting. Have a good evening, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.